I'm Dora Halstead, 76 years old, and every Tuesday at 800 am I wipe dust from the same old photo frames on the mantel. One is of my husband Edmund, cradling our son Hubert, in the hospital. Another shows our daughter Thelma in her graduation dress, staring straight into the camera like she already knew the life she wanted. Somewhere behind that photo is the last birthday card I received from my grandchildren, written in glitter gel pen and addressed to favorite grandma. I still keep it, even though they haven't called in months. I live alone in a creaky house on Willow Street, the one Edmund and I bought in 1968, and every night before bed, I still check that the door is locked, even though no one ever visits before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever felt like the people you love only remember you when they need something. My name's Dora, and this house has been my whole world for more than 5 decades. We raised our children here. We buried our parents from here. We peeled apples in this kitchen, made Thanksgiving stuffing at this very stove, and watched the world change through the front windows when Edmund passed away 15 years ago. The house got quieter, but not empty. Not really. The floorboards still creaked like they had something to say. The wind in the gutters still carried echoes of music and laughter. But lately, it's been harder to ignore the silence. Hubert lives just 20 minutes away, but his visits have thinned out over the years. Sometimes 2 months will pass without a single knock on the door. I remember when he first brought Justine over. She wore a red dress and perfume strong enough to give me a headache. She laughed too loud, interrupted too much. But what struck me most was how Hubert looked at her like he couldn't believe his luck. Like she hung the moon. They got married in a lavish ceremony with 300 guests, half of whom I'd never seen before. Edmund's life insurance paid for most of it. I didn't argue. I just nodded when Justine said, "You want your only son to have a decent wedding, don't you?" After the wedding, their visit slowed. The phone stopped ringing the first time I saw a photo of their newborn Ethan. It was on a social media site. I didn't even know I had my neighbor Miriam helped me log in, just to catch a glimpse. Miriam's one of the few people who drops by without a reason. She's a widow like me, a few years younger, and still keeps busy with book clubs and swimming lessons, and those little gadgets that count your steps. She says, "I need to get out more." I tell her. "I have my routine," she says. "I'm letting life pass me by." Thelma calls sometimes from Arizona, always around the holidays, always ending with just this once. "Mom, I promise she's on her 3rd husband now." I haven't met any of them. She was supposed to go to college. We had money saved. She chose to travel instead. Said she wanted to see the world. The education fund vanished somewhere between flight tickets and missed calls. I suppose I've always been the type to say yes to things. I watched the grandkids whenever they needed help, lent out the good dishes for events that didn't include me, gave money when there was no repayment in sight. When Hubert started a rare book business, I gave him my savings. The business lasted 6 months. I never asked for the money back. Justine once came by while Miriam and I were having tea. She asked for the fine china the set Edmund's parents gave us for our wedding. Every piece tied to a memory. I said yes, of course, and watched her carry it out stacked in a box, like it was nothing. A week later, 2 cups were broken. No apology, no offer to replace them. Just a text message with a shrug and silence. Miriam heard the whole exchange from the kitchen. The walls in this house don't keep secrets. You let her talk to you like that? She asked, and I just said, "What can I do? She's Hubert's wife." Miriam didn't say much after that, just looked at me the way people do when they want to say more, but know it won't make a difference. For years now, I've kept a secret. Not even Miriam knows about a safe tucked behind the canned goods in the basement. Inside it is an envelope, the deed to this house, and a bank account with a little over $300,000. It's not a fortune, but it's mine. I started saving again after that last big check to Hubert. Something in me changed. I never stopped loving them, but I started preparing for the day they'd stop pretending to love me back. I don't know what I expected when the phone rang that Monday morning. Maybe an invitation, maybe a lunch, just for the sake of it. But it was Justine asking for my antique silver candlesticks for a dinner party. "You're a miracle, Dora," she said. "Hubert will swing by to pick them up Friday after work." I offered to bring them myself, just to see if I might be invited. She paused, said something about my trouble driving at night. I've never once mentioned that to her. I wrapped the candlesticks in soft cloth like Edmund taught me. They shined like new when I was done, and I sat there holding them, thinking about how much Hubert had changed since he was a boy. Friday night came and went. They picked up the candlesticks, but not me. I stayed home, like always, watched the shadows move across the living room wall while the house sighed around me, like it knew something was coming, and it was. But I didn't see it yet, not until Saturday evening, when I showed up with 2 apple pies and realized I hadn't been invited to dinner at all. On Saturday, I arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, the way I always do when someone asks for my help. The driveway was packed with cars. I could hear music coming from the backyard laughter, too. I had spent the morning baking 2 apple pies from scratch, Edmund's recipe. I carried them carefully, one in each hand, and rang the bell. Justine opened the door with a glass of wine in one hand and her phone in the other. She smiled like she'd been caught off guard, even though we both knew I was expected. "Dora, perfect timing," she said, taking the pies from me before I could even step inside. "The kids are in the playroom upstairs. They're waiting for you." She didn't ask how I was, didn't offer to take my purse, just disappeared toward the kitchen with both pies balanced on her arm like she was delivering something from a catering tray. I stood in the entryway a moment longer before heading upstairs. The playroom was already full. Besides Ethan and Peyton, there were 3 other children I didn't recognize, probably the kids of Hubert's co-workers. All of them were sitting on beanbags, eyes glued to video game controllers, the screen flickering in the darkened room. "Hello, everyone," I said, stepping in with what I hoped was a warm smile. "How's it going in here?" Ethan didn't look up. "Mom said we're supposed to stay up here and not bother the adults." I nodded slowly, even though no one saw. I sat down on a small bench by the window and watched them play. No one asked me anything. No one seemed to care that I was even in the room. Downstairs, I could hear voices rising and falling, the clinking of glasses, bursts of laughter. Once, I thought I heard Hubert, but he didn't come upstairs, not even to check in. The hours dragged. I poured juice when someone asked, cleaned up a spilled bag of chips, and waited for anyone to tell me the kids could go down, or that I was free to join the party. But that never came. By 10 o'clock, the house began to quiet. The guests were saying their goodbyes, their footsteps fading down the porch steps. I waited a moment longer before stepping downstairs. Justine was in the living room now, barefoot, her hair a little frizzy from the humidity. "Thanks for your help today, Dora," she said, hugging me with one arm and patting my back like someone rewarding a volunteer. "And the pies' huge hit. Everyone loved them." "You're welcome," I said. Hubert walked over, his cheeks a little flushed, maybe from wine. "Mom, you sure you don't want to stay the night?" "It's late. The roads are dark." It was the first time he'd spoken directly to me all day. I almost said yes, but then I glanced at Justine and saw something in her posture shift, like she was holding her breath. And I knew. "No, I'll head home," I said. "I see just fine in the dark." That night, I didn't sleep right away. I lay awake, listening to the old house sigh and settle around me, the way it always did once the lights were off. I thought about how easily I had slipped into the background of my own family's life, how simple it had become to treat me like a helper, a favor, a pair of hands. Monday morning started as always. One slice of toast with apricot jam. A single cup of wheat tea. I took my vitamins, checked the weather, and looked out over the quiet street. At 9:30 on the dot, the phone rang. I didn't need to check the caller ID. Justine always called at the same time as if I were a time slot in her planner. "Good morning, Dora. How are you feeling?" Her voice was overly bright. "I'm well, thank you," I said, knowing it didn't matter. "Great. Listen, I have a small favor to ask. We're hosting another little dinner party this Saturday. Just a few friends from Hubert's work. Very casual. But I was thinking it would be lovely to use your silver candlesticks. You know, the antique ones." I looked over at the cabinet in the living room, where they were wrapped in soft cloth right where I had kept them since our 20th anniversary. Edmund had given them to me. Said they belonged in our home and nowhere else. "I can bring them over," I offered, hoping maybe this time there'd be room at the table for me. There was a pause. Then Justine's voice returned, just a bit too smooth. "Oh, no, you don't have to do that. Isn't night driving tough for you?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Anyway, Hubert can swing by and get them after work on Friday." "Thank you so much, Dora. You're a gem." After the call, I stared at the calendar. The last time they'd visited me had been April 18th, my birthday. They brought a box of chocolates I couldn't eat and lilies I was allergic to. The grandkids gave me cards that still smelled like a store shelf. I opened the cabinet and gently unwrapped the candlesticks. The silver had dulled a bit, so I sat down at the kitchen table and began polishing them one by one, just like I used to when Edmund was alive. My hands moved automatically. I thought about how Hubert used to sneak his little fingers under the cloth to peek at them, how he used to ask who would get them when we were gone. I never thought it would come to this. Tuesday morning, Hubert called. "Mom, are you busy tomorrow?" "No, not particularly. Justine and I have overlapping meetings. Could you pick up Ethan and Peyton from school?" "Of course," I said. He rattled off the details, 2 different pickup times, different entrances. He didn't ask if I minded waiting between them, didn't check if I was comfortable driving that far. Just said thank you, and hung up. Wednesday came. I dressed in a light blouse and navy slacks. Something nice, but not too much. The school was about a 20-minute drive. I parked and waited. Parents gathered in little clusters, young mothers in yoga pants, fathers in business shirts tapping at their phones. I stood alone. Peyton was first. Her backpack was almost as big as she was. She looked up at me, confused for a moment. "Where's Mom?" "She had a meeting, sweetheart. I'm taking you home today." She nodded and climbed into the back seat, immediately pulling out her phone. An hour later, Ethan joined us. He was taller than I remembered, more serious. I asked if they were hungry, suggested a cafe. "Mom doesn't like us eating out," he said. "Too much sugar." We drove straight to their house. I offered to wait with them until Justine came back, but Ethan shook his head. "We're old enough," he said. "We have homework." They walked inside without looking back. That night, I told Hubert everything went fine. He thanked me and quickly ended the call. I sat by the window afterward, watching the empty street, thinking how strange it is that a house can be so full of noise one moment and then so still. The next day, I ran into Justine at the grocery store. She was all smiles and small talk, but I could see the purpose behind the coincidence. After a few pleasantries, she said, "We're having a barbecue on Saturday for Hubert's team. We really need help with the kids. I tried to get a sitter, but they're all booked." Then she added, like it had just occurred to her, "Oh, and could you make your apple pie again?" Everyone loved it. I said I would. But by the time I got home and put the groceries away, something in my chest felt heavy. Not tired, not even sad, just heavy. I sat down at the kitchen table and folded my hands. Something had shifted, and I didn't know it yet, but the next Saturday would be the last time I said yes, without hesitation. Saturday morning, I rose before the sun. The kitchen was quiet, still holding on to the cool of the night. I pulled the flour from the cabinet, laid out the butter to soften, and began working the dough with steady hands. 2 apple pies, just like before. The house filled slowly with the scent of cinnamon and warm sugar. I opened the window above the sink, let the breeze in. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started. It was still early. By 10 o'clock, I had everything wrapped and ready. I changed into a soft blue cardigan Edmund had always liked. I pinned back my hair and looked in the mirror. I wasn't tired exactly, just slower than I used to be. I gathered the pies, got in the car, and drove the familiar road to Hubert's house. I didn't expect a greeting, and none came. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside and placed the pies on the kitchen counter. Justine called out from the back patio. "Dora, could you get the kids settled in the den? They've already eaten. Just throw on a movie or something." I found the children scattered on the living room rug, half-finished juice boxes and open bags of pretzels around them. I cleared the clutter and gathered the youngest onto the couch. Peyton asked for a blanket. I found one folded on the armchair. Ethan said nothing. Outside, through the glass doors, I could see the adults gathered under a white canopy. The grill was going, and Hubert stood next to it laughing with 2 men in polo shirts. Justine was by the drink table refilling glasses and greeting guests like she was hosting a magazine shoot. I sat quietly in the corner of the room, the television buzzing low, the sound of clinking cutlery drifting in. No one asked if I'd like a plate. No one brought me a chair. I stayed until sunset. When the last guest left, I stood and gathered my purse. Justine was inside now, wiping down the counters. She looked up surprised. "Oh, Dora, you're still here." I told her I'd be going. She smiled and thanked me again for the pies. The drive home was quiet. The sky had turned lavender. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes before going in. The house greeted me with its usual hush. I placed my shoes by the door, hung up my cardigan, and made myself a cup of tea. On Sunday, I didn't leave the house. I watered the fern in the hallway. I swept the porch. I tried reading, but the words wouldn't stay still. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, I had boiled water for tea twice and poured it out both times without drinking it. Monday came, and with it, the usual routine. I folded laundry I had washed days ago. I wrote a letter to an old friend but didn't mail it. I kept my cell phone in my apron pocket all morning, but it never rang. At noon, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote out a grocery list even though I still had enough food to last a week. Tuesday morning, I stood in front of my closet longer than I meant to. My hands drifted over old blouses, some still smelling faintly of cedar. I chose one I hadn't worn in years. I drove to the grocery store, circled the parking lot twice, and parked farther from the entrance than I usually did. Inside, everything was familiar, the hum of the overhead lights, the low music playing from hidden speakers. I moved slowly through the aisles, checking labels, comparing prices. At checkout, the cashier asked how my day was going. I smiled, said it was good. She didn't look up. Back home, I put everything away neatly, cans lined up, labels facing forward. The pantry was full, but it didn't feel like anything had been added. I made a sandwich I didn't finish and left the plate in the sink. That evening, I pulled out an old photo album. It had a green leather cover worn at the edges. Inside were pictures of birthdays, vacations, ordinary Saturdays with the kids playing in the backyard. There was one of Hubert in his scout uniform holding a homemade trophy. Another of Thelma asleep on Edmund's shoulder, her face sticky from cotton candy. I closed the album after a few minutes. I didn't want to cry. I just wanted the house to feel less quiet. Wednesday passed without a single phone call. I left the porch light on that night, even though I knew no one would come. By Friday, I had stopped checking the phone altogether. Instead, I dusted the high shelves, reorganized the linen closet, and clipped dead leaves from the houseplants. Miriam called around 4. We talked for a while about her grandniece's wedding and a new Thai place that had just opened downtown. She asked if I'd join her for lunch next week. I said I'd think about it. Saturday morning, I didn't bake. Sunday, I sat on the back steps for an hour, watching a squirrel dart across the fence line. The air had turned warm again. I remembered how Edmund used to fix the screen door when it creaked, how he always said, "A house needs tending," same as a heart. I couldn't remember the last time someone had knocked on that door. The next week, Hubert called. Justine had a conference coming up. Could I watch the kids for 3 days? He didn't ask if I was busy. Didn't ask how I'd been. Just gave me the dates. I said yes, and I did what was needed, picked them up, made their lunches, sorted through Peyton's backpack for permission slips. I didn't sleep well those nights. My hip ached from bending over too much. The stairs were harder than they used to be. On the third night after they'd gone home, I stood at my own kitchen sink and stared at my reflection in the dark window. It was the first time I allowed myself to say it out loud. I was tired. The kind of tired that seeps into your bones and stays there even after a full night's sleep. I turned off the light, walked to the bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long while before lying down. I didn't know what I would do yet, but something had begun to shift. Quietly, slowly. Just like the seasons do when you're not watching. Tuesday morning started like most others. The kitchen held a faint scent of lemon from the wipe I'd used on the counters the night before. Outside, the mail truck passed by a little later than usual. I had just sat down with a second cup of tea when the phone rang. It was Hubert. He didn't ask how I was. Just launched right in. "Mom, I've been meaning to talk to you about something important. It's a bit of a big ask." I stayed quiet and let him go on. "We're looking at a house. Bigger place, better school district room for a home office. We found one we really like, but the offer window's tight. And we're short. Not by much. Well, about 35,000. I didn't say anything. Hubert cleared his throat. "I know that's a lot, but you've said before you weren't doing anything with Dad's pension. And this would really help us get settled. We'd pay you back, of course." I looked out the window. The lawn hadn't been mowed in a week, and the dandelions were starting to spread. My voice came out softer than I intended. "That's nearly all of what I have set aside, Hubert." There was a pause on the line, then the sound of him exhaling. "I know, but it's not like you need it now. You've got the house, your car's paid off, no other big expenses, right? You'd really be helping us move forward." He promised he'd talk to Justine, figure out a repayment plan. I said I'd think about it. We ended the call. I stayed seated at the kitchen table for a long while, one hand on my teacup. The house felt heavy, like the walls were listening. I stood and walked to the den, opened the roll-top desk Edmund used to use when balancing the checkbook. I pulled out the folder where I kept my statements. Retirement insurance, a savings account with just under $43,000 in it. I closed the folder and left it on the desk. That night, I didn't sleep much. I thought about our first house on Maple Street, how we scraped together every last cent for the down payment, how Edmund worked weekends at the mill, and I took in sewing just to cover Christmas. We never asked anyone for help. We just managed. Wednesday morning, the phone rang again. It was Justine this time. "Dora, thank you again for even considering it," she said. "We're just so close. This house really could be a fresh start for the kids, and honestly, you know how hard it is for young families these days." She kept her tone light, cheerful, but I could hear the press behind her words. "We'll bring the paperwork over Friday night. That way, you have the weekend to sign." She hadn't asked if I'd decided. Friday evening, Hubert arrived just after 6. He brought a stack of documents in a manila envelope and a bottle of wine I couldn't drink. "You're doing the right thing, Mom," he said as he handed them to me. I placed the envelope on the table. "I haven't made a decision yet." He blinked. "Well, I thought I said I'd think about it," I repeated. He left half an hour later, the envelope still sitting unopened on the dining table. That weekend, I didn't answer the phone. I took long walks instead, slow and steady, along the edge of the neighborhood, past the houses with trimmed hedges and porch flags. I made soup from scratch and read 3 chapters of an old novel I'd started years ago, but never finished. I played no music. The house stayed quiet. On Sunday night, I sat down and reread Edmund's old ledger book. On the inside cover in his handwriting, he had written something once: "What we save defines what we leave." Monday morning, I called my bank. I asked questions, took notes. Then I called a lawyer whose number I'd kept tucked away for years. We talked for 20 minutes. When I hung up, I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't courage, not exactly, but it was something close. Tuesday, I called Hubert. "I've thought about it," I said, "and I've decided not to lend you the money." There was silence on the line. "Wait, what?" His voice had lost the easy calm. "Mom, I don't think you understand. We already made the offer. We gave the agent our intent. I understand," I said. "But this is just sitting in your account. I'm keeping it there." Another pause. "I didn't realize you'd become so protective." I didn't respond. He hung up first. That night, I watched the sun set from the back porch, wrapped in a shawl Edmund gave me on our 25th anniversary. I didn't feel triumphant, but I didn't feel guilty either. Wednesday morning, Justine showed up unannounced. I saw her car pull in from the window and open the door before she could knock. She had a smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Dora," she said, "can we talk?" I let her in. She didn't sit. "I know this might feel like a big decision," she began, "but we're family. This move is for your grandchildren, too. Think about what kind of legacy you're leaving behind." I didn't answer right away. "I've made my decision," I said. She opened her mouth to reply, but didn't. She stayed another minute, then left without saying goodbye. The silence that followed felt like a clean page. For the first time in years, I didn't feel obligated to call anyone, check on anyone, bake anything. I spent the afternoon in the garden, pulled weeds, trimmed back the rose bush that had overgrown its trellis. I sat in the sun and let the warmth sink into my shoulders. Something was blooming again. Thursday morning, I opened the little notepad I kept beside the phone and wrote a single sentence: "Unavailable next week for childcare. Hope that's okay." I tore it out, folded it twice, and slid it into the envelope with Peyton's school forms. I dropped it off on my way to the library. The building smelled the same as always, old paper and floor wax. I hadn't been in months. I wandered slowly through the large print section, ran my fingers across the spines of familiar titles. I checked out 3 books and a DVD for no reason other than it caught my eye. When I got home, I placed them on the coffee table and didn't rush to read them. Just having them there made the room feel fuller. That night, I made myself a plate of roasted potatoes and steamed green beans. I sat at the table and used the good dishes. By Sunday evening, I still hadn't heard anything from Hubert or Justine, but Monday morning, right after I returned from walking around the block, the phone rang. Justine's voice was tight. "Peyton said you're not watching the kids this week. Is something going on?" "I have some plans," I said. "Appointments, errands." There was a pause. "Could you reschedule?" "We really need you. I'm not available," I repeated. She didn't reply right away. When she did, her voice had gone cold. "Well, I guess we'll figure something out." I thanked her and ended the call. That afternoon, I opened the sewing cabinet in the den. It still smelled faintly of lavender. I hadn't touched my machine in nearly 2 years. The thread was dry and a little dusty, but it still held. I sat down and began stitching a hem that had unraveled on an old kitchen towel. The rhythm came back quickly. The gentle thrum of the needle, the pull of fabric beneath my hands. It was like greeting an old friend. By the time the sun lowered over the treetops, I had repaired 2 pillowcases and started cutting fabric for a tote bag. On Wednesday, I met Miriam for lunch downtown. We sat at a booth near the window, watched people rush by with iced coffees and briefcases. We split a grilled cheese and each ordered a cup of tomato basil soup. "You look rested," she said. I smiled. The next week, I cleared out the back bedroom. I hadn't stepped in there much since Edmund passed. It had become a sort of catch-all for whatever I didn't know where else to put. I donated a few boxes of clothes, packed up a stack of old magazines, and found 2 watercolors Thelma had painted in junior high. I framed one and hung it above the sewing table. On Saturday morning, I was deadheading the marigolds out front when a car pulled into the driveway. Hubert stepped out still in his work shirt sleeves rolled up. "Mom," he said, walking up the path, "we need to talk." I wiped my hands on my gardening apron. He didn't wait. "We've been patient. You've had your space. But this isn't fair. Justine's overloaded. The kids miss you. And frankly, the arrangement wasn't supposed to be optional." I stayed quiet. He shook his head, exasperated. "You're retired. What else are you doing?" I looked at the marigolds. Some were thriving. A few had already given all they could. "I'm busy, Hubert." "With what living?" His face twitched. "That's just selfish. You think we don't have needs too?" I didn't answer that. I didn't argue. I turned back toward the porch. He didn't follow. That night, I wrote a short note on a plain card. "I won't be available for ongoing childcare going forward. I wish you and the family all the best. Love, Mom." I mailed it the next morning. The house was quiet again, but it felt different now. Not heavy, not lonely, just still. I cooked what I liked. I played music while I worked on the quilt blocks. I opened windows and let the late spring air move through the curtains. I started keeping a small notebook in the kitchen where I wrote one thing each day that had brought me peace. A bluebird on the fence, the smell of fresh bread, a neighbor's laugh drifting over from next door. 2 weeks passed without a word from Hubert or Justine. Then, on a Tuesday evening, just before dusk, Peyton knocked on my door. I opened it, and there she was, holding a folded piece of construction paper. "I made this at school," she said, handing it to me. Inside was a drawing of a house, a woman in glasses, and a bunch of flowers taller than the roof. "I love Grandma's garden" was written across the top in bright purple crayon. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. We sat on the porch swing and watched the sun lower itself behind the trees. She told me about a book she was reading, a science project involving celery, and how Ethan got in trouble for drawing on the table. She didn't mention the missed babysitting or the house Hubert didn't get. She just leaned her head against my arm and kept talking, and I let her. The envelope came on a Thursday. It was cream-colored, thicker than standard, and addressed in formal print to Mrs. Dora Latt. I noticed right away that it hadn't come from Hubert or Justine's return address, but from a downtown law office, Morrison and Tate, it said in the corner. I placed it on the entry table unopened and made myself a cup of tea. I didn't touch it until after supper. I sat at the kitchen table, unfolded the flap, and began to read. It was a letter from an attorney representing Hubert and Justine. Polite in tone, but unmistakably firm in its message. The words family commitment implied agreement, and reasonable financial expectations stood out on the page. Toward the end, the letter suggested that, given the ongoing pattern of unpaid labor and informal support, my refusal to continue providing childcare or contribute financially to the new home could be interpreted as a breach of familial obligation. I read it again, and then once more. Then I folded it back up, slid it into its envelope, and tucked it beneath the fruit bowl. The following day, I walked 3 blocks to a mailbox I hadn't used in years and dropped a different envelope inside one addressed to Charles Flint, a local attorney Edmund and I had used when we updated our wills. He had retired, but I'd read he still advised part-time out of his home. I'd scribbled a note asking for a call. Charles phoned that evening. "Dora, good to hear your voice. I wondered when you'd find that file." He remembered everything, even the year we signed it, 2011. Edmund had asked him to draft an addendum to our estate documents. At the time, Hubert and Justine were going through a rough patch, and Edmund had grown uneasy about what might happen to my finances if something ever went wrong. "It was your husband's idea," Charles said. He wanted to make sure there was a protective structure in place. "You remember the clause about undue influence? I didn't, but Charles did. He offered to stop by the next afternoon with a copy of the document. He arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, gray slacks, windbreaker, a slim briefcase in hand. We sat at the dining table, the same one where I'd once hosted Hubert's birthday dinners. Charles pulled out the papers and began to walk me through them. In clear language, Edmund had established what was essentially a family trust, one that gave me full control with clauses shielding me from coerced gifts or obligations rooted in guilt or family pressure. There was even a section that said any attempt to intimidate or legally compel me would result in an automatic forfeiture of any inheritance tied to that trust. He was very precise, Charles said, and he made it ironclad. I remember him saying, "If she's ever made to feel less than I want her protected." I didn't say anything. Charles handed me a fresh copy and a business card with his updated number. "If this escalates," he said, "let me know." He patted my hand gently before leaving. That weekend, I bought a small potted fern and placed it on the windowsill in the living room. The corner had always felt empty after Edmund's armchair was donated. The plant made it softer. On Monday morning, I wrote a letter of my own. It was addressed to the firm that had sent Hubert's letter. I kept it short. I referenced the trust documents. I included the date and clause Charles had highlighted. I ended the note with a single sentence. "No further contact on this matter is necessary." I made 2 copies, one for my records, one for Charles, and walked them to the post office myself. The woman at the counter asked if I wanted tracking. I said yes. The days that followed felt calm. I swept the porch, baked a peach cobbler, and watched a storm roll in from the back steps. When the rain hit the roof, it was the kind of sound that made you sit still and listen. A week passed without any word. Then, on a Friday afternoon, a car pulled up out front and idled longer than usual. I stepped to the window. Hubert sat in the driver's seat. He didn't get out. Just stared at the house for a minute, then pulled away. No envelope came that day, or the next. Instead, on Sunday morning, I received a voicemail from Justine. Her voice was thinner than usual. "Hi, Dora. Just wanted to say we got your letter. We understand your decision. The kids still talk about your lemon muffins. Hope you're well." She hung up without saying more. That evening, I placed the letter from Morrison and Tate into the back of a drawer in the roll-top desk. I locked it. Then I poured myself a glass of cold water, sat on the back steps, and watched the last of the invitation came tucked inside a pale blue envelope addressed in careful script. I found it in the mailbox between a coupon flyer and my water bill. It was from the community center. Someone had nominated me for a volunteer recognition luncheon. I almost didn't go. It had been years since I last taught knitting in the side room off the main hall. But something about the way the card was written plain and gentle felt like a door I hadn't opened in a long time. The luncheon was held in the old multi-purpose room, The one with the folding chairs and the mural of local wildlife that used to fascinate the preschoolers. I hadn't seen it in ages. There were white paper tablecloths, a few vases of daisies, and a table of sandwiches and sheet cake near the window. I sat toward the back. It was warm, and the coffee smelled faintly burnt, just like it always had. People came up now and then, neighbors mostly offering a hand on my shoulder or a kind word. I didn't feel like anyone special. I hadn't for a long time. Then a voice behind me said, "Mrs. Latt." I turned and saw a young woman, late 20s, maybe shoulder-length curls, and a bright green dress that reminded me of spring. Her name tag read, Melanie Hartz. She smiled like someone who knew a secret but was kind enough to wait until you asked. "I don't expect you to remember me," she said, "but you used to lead the Saturday craft group here. I was in 3rd grade. I made a lopsided pot holder that you said looked like a flag." I blinked at her for a second. Then I saw it, her eyes, the tilt of her chin. She'd been tiny then, with a gap-toothed smile and a fondness for glitter glue. "My grandmother had just passed," she said, "and I didn't really talk to anyone. You let me sit next to you even when I didn't say a word." She reached into her purse and pulled out a photo. It showed a classroom, a line of children holding up hand-painted birdhouses. I was there too in the back row, laughing at something out of frame. "I work here now," she said, sliding the photo into my hand. "And when the staff asked who we should honor this year, I said your name before anyone else." I didn't know what to say. I just looked at the picture and felt something settle in my chest, quiet and full. The microphone buzzed at the front of the room, and someone began reading names. Melanie gave my shoulder a quick squeeze before joining the staff at the front table. When they called my name, I stood slowly, unsure if my knees would hold. But they did. The applause was gentle, polite, and warm. Someone took a photo. Someone else handed me a certificate in a plastic frame. After the lunch, I stayed a little longer talking to a few folks I hadn't seen in years. One woman asked if I'd consider coming back to teach another craft class, something small, maybe just once a month. I said I'd think about it. Later that evening, I walked back home carrying the framed certificate under one arm. The sky had that golden hue it gets just before dusk in late spring. When I reached my front porch, I paused. On the top step was a basket wrapped in cellophane. Inside was a tin of tea, a jar of jam, and a loaf of banana bread I recognized instantly. Justine's recipe. Taped to the side was a note. Hubert's handwriting, unmistakable. "For what it's worth, we're sorry. We hope you're doing well." I carried it inside and placed it on the kitchen counter. I didn't open it right away. I just looked at it for a while, then made myself a cup of tea from the tin and sat near the window. As the sun dipped below the trees, I thought about Melanie and the birdhouse and the way time loops around when you least expect it. I didn't open the basket that night. I left it on the counter while I washed the dishes and watered the fern by the window. I moved through the house like I always did, checking the doors, turning off lights, folding the throw blanket at the end of the couch. But every time I passed the kitchen, that little cellophane-wrapped basket seemed to glow under the overhead light, like it had something to say. The next morning, I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid on the note. Just Hubert's handwriting again. "We're sorry." No long speech, no explanation. I stood there for a while, holding the tin of tea in one hand and the jar of jam in the other. And then I put the note back in the basket and carried the whole thing out to the back porch. The wind was light, the kind that lifts the corners of paper and sets wind chimes singing. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down in my usual spot. It tasted fine. The banana bread, too. Maybe a little drier than I remembered, but still sweet. Still familiar. But that's not why I ate it. I didn't do it for peace or reconciliation. I didn't do it to open any doors. I did it because I was no longer angry. Not in the way I used to be. The weight of disappointment of always waiting for people to see me really see me had finally worn out. Like a coat I no longer needed. I didn't call them back. I didn't send a note. I didn't tell them I forgave them. I just let it be. Let them sit with what they'd done in the quiet space that comes when a mother steps out of the role they took for granted. The next Sunday, I went back to the community center. Not for any recognition or luncheon, just to sit with the knitters. A small group, now 2 new ladies and 1 man who made scarves for the shelter in winter. I brought my old basket, the one with the little scissors and the faded measuring tape tucked into the side. I found my rhythm again without even thinking. And I started saying yes to more things. A garden walk, a book club, a trip to the county museum I'd always meant to visit. I'd thought my life had narrowed to the shape of that house, to the sounds of someone else's children and someone else's needs. But I was wrong. There was still room, still air to breathe, still days left that were mine to shape. People asked if I ever made up with my son. I told them the truth. We're not angry anymore, I'd say, but we're not the same. And that was all right, because dignity doesn't come from someone handing it to you. It comes from standing up even quietly, even slowly, and saying, "This is enough. This is where I draw the line." Thank you for listening to my story. And if you've ever had to find your way back to yourself, whether after a long silence or a broken trust, I hope you know it's never too late. Leave a comment and let me know you're here. And if this story stayed with you, go ahead and subscribe. We've still got a lot of life to tell.